Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Arseholics podcast on Sunday, the 2nd of June. And it's been a little while since we recorded, actually. I feel like I say that too often, which is not a good thing. But we didn't record after the last game of the season. So, you know, apologies if anyone out there was waiting to hear our let's just say kind of underline of what was a amazing kind of end to the season, but we didn't just quite get it over the line. I know everyone was quite sad. The dust has kind of settled now. So what Aaron and here and I thought we would do, given that we've kind of missed that kind of, grief period, if you like, immediately after the end of the season, was try and be incredibly forward looking today. And what we are going to do is talk a bit about basically all the transfer rumors that are going on around at the moment, because there are a few of these transfer rumors that concern players that I think are widely debated amongst the fan base as to whether we should sort of keep, sell, loan, etc. So we're going to sort of talk a bit about that and also about some of the players that we've been linked to bring in. And if we get a bit of time, we might have a bit of a laugh at all the managerial merry-go-round that's going on around us. And, we are in this kind of just incredibly grateful place, shall we say, of not having to do that this season. It feels like we are just about to secure Arteta on a longer term contract, making him incredibly highly paid. But when you look at all the carnage out there, it's probably the right thing to do. But maybe that's a debate for another day. But to join me talking about transfers, etc., I've got Aaron in here. Hello, mate. How are you doing?
Hello, mate. Good evening. Yeah, good. Good. How are you?
Yeah, good, good. Actually, I found that I got over the grief of the end of the season pretty well, and pretty quickly. I don't know
Mm.
whether it's because immediately it felt like everyone, like the media, etc., just shifted onto all the carnage that's going on with the other clubs, like with all the managerial situations at Chelsea, at Bayern, at Barcelona, a bit at Man United, etc. I felt like that's all that anyone was talking about immediately after the season was over. And then obviously the Euros. So I don't know if that helped me just kind of get
Mm.
distracted. And now I'm very much in this kind of place of, do you know what? Cool. Let's see what we're going to do this summer, and let's see like where we can go next. And I'm feeling incredibly positive about everything. How are you feeling? I know we're not going so backward looking, but how do you feel now? It's all done.
Yeah, I think you're right. I wasn't too upset about it. And it was weird, right? We were all at the last game. And the one thing I do remember is, at full time, I think all of us were like, oh, okay, it's a bit annoying, but okay, like we had a good season. But, the players look devastated. And the players are absolutely gutted. And I just remember thinking, like, maybe maybe they look. I think for us, I think I pre-grieved, right? So where like actually the run up to the last few games, I think we all kind of knew what was happening, and I think I said this where it was like, look, we're pretending there's a title race, but there probably wasn't one for the last couple of games, where because we're up against Man City, all that they do, and we were hoping for a miracle, and look, we didn't get it, but I think the players really, really had to believe because at that level, you kind of have to do that. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Um, so yeah, I think as a fan, I was just like at the end of the season, it was ridiculous. Like I think we were so good, we did everything pretty much, and didn't work out. And I'm not going to go and do a retro on the season, but it didn't work out. We had a good season. I think it was a brilliant season in terms of just fun and the results and watching the team and enjoying the team. And yeah, I think my mind's now on next season where we go. Had 2 weeks where we could kind of just watch other teams. Uh, I did actually enjoy watching Man City lose the cup final, to be honest. And I know it came with the downside of having to watch Man United win the cup final, but I still quite enjoyed it. And then I watched the Champions League final yesterday, and yeah, it was. I watched it as a neutral. Don't really have that much animosity for Real Madrid. I like Dortmund, but again, not anything, no massive love affair with them. So watched it as a neutral, enjoyed the game, and yeah, now it's looking forward to the Euros and just seeing where we go and seeing what we do this summer. And we'll discuss this in a bit. There's some transfer rumors, and nothing's got me too excited yet. But yeah, I think I'm already looking forward to next season, seeing where we go. Fixtures are probably out in a couple of weeks, and then we can do this whole thing again.
Yeah, man. I mean, let's get into it because it's not been the start of a summer window where there's been one huge transfer relating to Arsenal that's been bubbling, right? So, we knew last season, we knew when we got to the summer that clearly we were going to go in for a big defensive midfielder, and Declan Rice was quite clearly the one that everyone wanted, and there were some pretty solid rumours that he could go to Arsenal. So it felt like the beginning of the summer, we already knew that was going to be a thing. And it's interesting because there's no such situation now, and the season sort of ended, and it's been a couple of weeks. Again, no new real big story has emerged aside from this Benjamin Sesko stuff that has come quite recently. So I guess to just cap on the situation, right? Towards the back end of last season, there was a lot of, let's say back end, let's say like at the beginning of the final third. I know that's oddly specific, but let's just go with that for a second. At the beginning of the final third, there was still a lot of chat about Arsenal needing a centre forward. That was going to be the thing that they were going to do. Ivan Toney's come back from his ban. Everyone was sort of talking about, oh, this is Ivan Toney's kind of audition spell for a bigger move. People were talking about that. Victor Osimhen was still being discussed as someone who was going to go to big clubs. There was kind of then a bit of chat about other people, other players, but it did seem like it was very much about who are Arsenal going to target. But then Kai Havertz kept on scoring or assisting pretty much every game. Ended up with a fantastic goal assist return for that second half of the season, and suddenly there was this narrative of, well, hang on, maybe Arsenal won't even sign a centre forward. Maybe they're going to do something else. Maybe Havertz is the one. Maybe, if he can do this in his first season, what will he do in second? There was all that sort of stuff. So then it kind of quietened down a little bit around that. But it feels like over the last couple of weeks, not over the last couple of weeks, really over the last week, a few people have been talking about Benjamin Sesko and talking about how he is not only strongly linked with a lot of big clubs, but allegedly he's kind of done a undercover through intermediaries, come and get me plea to Arsenal. He's made it clear that Arsenal is first choice, allegedly. And apparently we are very interested. What do you think about that, mate? He's a young striker. He's 21. He just turned 21 years old. He's really tall, depending on what you read, 6'4", 6'5". He clearly has an eye for goal. He looks like he looks like a Haaland type in most ways. He's just so direct and has this. He looks like he has this incredible running power, and has done well in the Bundesliga, just like Haaland did. What do you make of this story? Do you think it's got legs to it, and is he the sort of player that you think you'd want to see?
Yeah, I think. Look, I'm not a Benjamin Sesko expert, and I've been following him for all of about 7 days. As with most of these players, when we sign them, I think everyone then goes and watches the compilations, looks at the stats, and tries and understands as much as we can, right? And I think, look, before we go into the player, I do think we need to mix up our attack. I think we've got a lot of technical, safe, keep the ball type players. And I don't think we have that. Obviously we don't have that Haaland type, but no one else does. But I've always felt that we could do with something a bit different, especially off the bench, right? And up until now, we've had Jesus coming on, where Jesus has been something a bit different, but again, his goal scoring prowess isn't really there. And then we've had Eddie Nketiah, who is something different, but he just isn't able to do what he's good at effectively in this team at this level. So what I do like about these rumors is that he does look like he's something and someone that we don't have. He does have a lot of that running power. Looking at just reading a bit about his season, it sounds like he started off the season where he wasn't even really starting games, wasn't really making the squad, and then what it sounds like, I think he's kind of scored 7 in his last 7 or something like that, where then he came out with a decent return. So the real debate is that is that kind of like what's been happening with Havertz this season, where first half of the season didn't really click, and then it clicked, or is it just actually this is a real form patch where again it's the Bundesliga, the defenses aren't as good, and can he really translate that into Premier League numbers? And I don't know, but I think he's the type of player that I would welcome, assuming the fee is right. He doesn't seem to me to be the let's break the bank, let's get him in. He is going to be the ceiling raiser. But I think a bit like Havertz, he could be an option depending on the opponent, depending on what you need, and they could rotate quite nicely. And it might mean that you might need to play a few different pieces around him to get the best out of him. But I think this unpredictability is probably what Arteta is going for. So I think he does look okay. He looks good. Haven't seen a lot of him, so am I like super excited about him? No, but naturally, I think with any striker coming in, any goal scorer, you get excited about the potential, right? And you can see just the talent ID and our transfer dealings over the last 3 or 4 years has just filled me with so much confidence that I just think if we're going for this player and if we are going for big money, more often than not, it will probably work out. So, yeah, and at 21, young enough where even if it doesn't work out, it hopefully won't be an absolute disaster in terms of the fee and recouping it. So, yeah, yeah, I think it'll be a good move generally. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, like you say, it doesn't sound like it's going to be a break the bank type scenario. The fees that people are sort of mooting around that 50 million mark, which you sort of think that most players who are half decent are around that 50 million mark. That I wouldn't, that's not the sort of gargantuan figure that it was back in the day. I think the other thing is he's part of this Red Bull system, went to Salzburg, Leipzig, etc. And so there is this like really obvious comparison with Haaland. And I think the only thing that perhaps people shouldn't get carried away with is, I think, like you've pointed out, he perhaps has had a good patch recently. I don't, I didn't know the sequence of his scoring this season, but the thing that did strike me is that it's not like his stats are prolific generally. People are talking about him like this huge talent, and I think in the Bundesliga he's like joint 8th top scorer or something like this. There's a lot of players who have scored a lot more goals than him in the Bundesliga, and even his goals per games, it doesn't seem to be outstanding. But there's so many things you could say, to contest that, and I think you sort of factor in that he's probably not the end product right now at his age. It goes back to something that I think we've touched upon previously, that Arteta and Edu have built so much goodwill now. You just sort of trust whatever they do. So I do think that it's right for us to be going for one of these sort of younger type centre forwards, because I think that there's a danger otherwise that you get someone like you, if we are that is interested in the centre forward, you go get someone like an Osimhen or something like that. If it doesn't really work out, they are a bit older, so it's going to cost a lot more money in the first place, and then you've got to just be, you can't wait too long. You need the impact here and now. You could then flip the argument and say that we are at that stage of evolution where we need the kind of floor to be raised, sort of thing. But I quite like the little clips I've seen on YouTube, etc. I quite like what I've been reading about him as a player. It does seem interesting that I think that there are some sort of similarities with Kai Havertz, but maybe just in a kind of very purely physical sense and not like in an actual how they play. But I if it is Sesko, that then I totally trust Arteta, etc. And I think that ultimately we are going to have to get someone in that position, even if it isn't where we think our focal point of attack is going to be next season, because Eddie's probably going to leave, etc. Isn't he? So we will be short of numbers.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, and you mentioned it right, like he's probably not the kind and Russ kind of says he thinks he's a project signing and not the finished article, and I agree. I don't think he certainly isn't the finished article, but the problem is at like we're doing this thing where we're trying to buy the best young players in kind of that 20 to 23 bracket. The problem is now a lot of other clubs are doing the same thing. Like, it
Yeah,
just seems like we were one of the first. I know Madrid have been doing this for a little while as well, but like you look at what Chelsea are trying to do. I'm sure a lot of these clubs now are like, forget buying 26-year-olds, 27-year-olds, 28-year-olds for big money. If you're going to spend 50 million pounds, spend it on a 21-year-old or 22-year-old.
Yep.
And I feel like if we don't move, someone else will buy him this summer. Because purely just, if someone says Arsenal are interested, our track record in scouting, if you've got a half decent brain in football, if you say, well, if Arsenal are interested, this player must be half decent. And if Arsenal don't buy him for whatever reason, I mean, if you're Chelsea, you just be like, let's just buy him. I'm still convinced it's exactly why Chelsea bought Mudryk. It's like, well, Arsenal want him. He must be half decent. Let's just break the bank and buy him. And I do wonder where, like, actually at this level, where our status now in terms of European clubs and kind of the project and what we're doing, and just the level that we're at, a lot of teams will try and go for the players that we're going for, and there aren't actually that many players out there in world football at the level we're at that will improve us. Or so it's either we find more of the same, like there aren't any. I don't think there's a Declan Rice equivalent striker out there in the world, right? Where we can say, let's spend 80, 90, 100 million, get that guy, and he will sort us out for the next 7-8 years. And if that guy comes up, then we should absolutely go for him. But, it wasn't, Rice was perfect age, exact position we needed. West Ham were willing to sell. He was willing to move. He had the Premiership experience, all of the things. And even then, we had to spend 100 million to get him. All of those things lined up perfectly for us to get that ceiling raiser that was Declan Rice. And I don't think this summer, in any position that we go for, it will be a player like that. What I'm expecting is more players like Julian Timber, who are good, young, up and coming, that we're going to take a bit of a gamble on and say we're hoping that at least one of these players can click and potentially be the next Declan Rice, and say, but we're just not going to pay that huge fee, but instead we're going to have to pay a 40 million, a 50 million, and get in players like that. So I do think Sesko is potentially one of those types of players. But and with any of those players, there is a bit of a gamble that it might not work out, especially when we are not buying from within the Premier League, which is what I think we've shown we really like to do.
We prefer to do.
Yeah.
You're spot on. Actually, going back to something that you said, because I think it is one of these things as fans, we probably need to manage our expectations. Because I think the point that Russ has made here about, Sesko not being the finished article, which he thinks we absolutely need, i.e., we absolutely need the finished article. I think most of us would say exactly the same thing. But I think we do need to think about your point. Over the last 2 seasons, it feels like clubs have just not been able to go find that ready-made centre forward. They've actually just, if they've lost one, they've tried to just change their system or find a young striker that they can put their money behind and think, okay, we're going to just actually, it's a better use of our money to just back this one in the longer term. Hoyland is a really good example, right? Where it looks like it would feel like Man United overpay for most players, don't get me wrong, but they've obviously paid a lot of money for this guy who basically had scored 10 goals in Serie A. But, really, I think a better example to sort of make this point is perhaps Real Madrid themselves. Because Real Madrid, they lost Karim Benzema, who was their focal point, and he was absolutely outrageously good for those few seasons, particularly kind of towards the end of his time at Real Madrid. And this is Real Madrid, right? They can go sign pretty much whoever the hell they want. And they sign Joselu.
Yeah.
Right? And they sign him for, I don't know, whatever, peanut. I think it's on loan, right? I don't even think they've properly signed him yet. And instead they basically changed their system. So they basically ended up playing like sort of Bellingham as a false nine or Rodrigo, for example. So a club like Real Madrid are basically saying, well, there is no like worldy centre forward that we can go for, right?
I think the other thing is they will obviously, like, Joselu is very clearly a stopgap because we know we're getting Mbappe in a year, right?
That's fair.
So
that's fair as well.
If you're telling me we've got Mbappe coming in a year,
yeah,
and
exactly.
then I think so that does placate like the demands of Madrid, and I think the fans probably saw that one, say, okay, look. And then they got lucky, right? Bellingham turned out to be an incredible goal scorer, especially in the first half of the season. And you've got so much talent. But you're right, they took a gamble. They were like, we're going to hope that someone like Joselu works out for a season. and I mean, it obviously did, right? The overall squad filled those gaps. I don't know. I don't feel like we obviously can't do that unless unless we do have our eyes on a big number 9. But I mean, I don't know. I don't even think we need, like, if you said we're going to give you 100 million, 150 million pounds to spend on one position this summer or even next summer, whoever it is, and you can get the best player, like realistically, the best player in the world or the best up and coming talent in the world in that position, I don't think I'd say go and spend it on a striker. I'd probably say I'd rather see that as a midfielder alongside Declan Rice, or at a left back, where I think we could really raise the ceiling. And I think our system doesn't warrant the need for a Haaland type, where obviously if someone says you can sign Haaland, you'll do it. But at the same time, I don't think it's our lack of a Haaland that stopped us from winning the league this season, for example. I think it's goals, it's being clinical, it's finishing the chances, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's an out and out number 9.
Yeah, agree. And Russ making another point here about, if you were to compare someone like a Sesko with an Isaac or Watkins, and the fact that they are prem proven and ready. I mean, it's a good point. And let's see how this one pans out, right? Because this is, I'd probably say, the first major rumor incoming this season. But no one super reliable has come out and said that this is really on the cards. So let's see how that goes. Let's talk a little bit about elsewhere in the squad, mate, because actually there's probably been more rumors of stuff going out than in. One of the things is very recently sort of heated up is Emile Smith Rowe. So Emile Smith Rowe, you'll recall, like a couple of seasons ago, it may have even been just one season ago or so. No, I think it was two seasons ago. Remember, there was Aston Villa were making a couple of signings, and there was this rumor going around about Aston Villa targeting Emile Smith Rowe, and it was just hilarious. Like all Arsenal fans, because it was done in the way of, Emile Smith Rowe would leave Arsenal to go join a more exciting project at Aston Villa, and Arsenal fans all around the world, including myself, were just laughing at that. It never happened. Obviously, it was just like a nonsense story, and it was just Villa fans getting way ahead of themselves at the time. But now, if we kind of go 2 years now on, and we are where we are, Emile Smith Rowe, who's hardly kicked a ball this season, partly through injuries, but partly because, to be honest, he's just not been able to get in the team, even as a sub. It's been very sparing. We've kind of got a situation now where fans are sort of seemingly divided as to whether they think Smith Rowe is someone that we need to keep at the club. Also, given the fact that he is homegrown, with profit and sustainability rules, selling someone like a Smith Rowe represents pure profit, which is a really rubbish way, I think, in sometimes analyzing, as a fan, analyzing who you want to go in and out. And, I talk to a lot of Chelsea fans these days who are sick to death of the idea of selling players for pure profit because they've got the likes of Matson, etc., Gallagher, and others. I'm forgetting someone major. Oh, even Chaloba, who's being linked with going away purely because it's all around pure profit. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, we do sort of need to think about those things sometimes. And so you've got Smith Rowe now, who, with that situation in mind, the Villa rumors have suddenly hotted up again. They are back. People are saying Emery wants Smith Rowe, and also more recently, there's been I think the Telegraph ran with the story. It was Telegraph or Guardian, one of the two has run with the story that Fulham have made Smith Rowe basically their top target. What do you make of that situation, mate? Keep, sell, what's a good price? Tell me how you feel.
Yeah, it's one of those where I think as a fan base we have an emotional connection that probably stops us from thinking quite rationally about him. I think he's one of the very few, right, where we're a bit blind when it comes to it. But look, I reckon I don't know if you go and find the Arseholics episode from this time last year, we probably had a conversation about Smith Rowe, and a lot of it would have been exactly the same as what we're probably going to say now, which is like, look, he hasn't stayed fit. He has been in and out of the team, and then he hasn't been able to get in the team when he's been fit. And I think what's frustrating is when he has been on the pitch, he's looked all right, he's looked well, but he hasn't really been given a chance. But I think the thing I worry about is if we keep him, when is he going to get that chance? And keeping him in the squad potentially stops us from going and signing a player and giving minutes to a player where they could really, really like push for a first team spot. And I'm not sure I see Smith Rowe really display like becoming a first team player now, like regularly, and being that first choice 11. We don't know what his best position is really, but let's just say it's that attacking 8 or left sided player. I don't see how he does that. So I ultimately wouldn't be upset if he doesn't go. And he is the type of player where I say, look, if the money doesn't come and the fee isn't right, then we don't need to sell him. And I think it wouldn't be the end of the world if he did stay. But I think if a good offer comes in and it's what we think is fair, then for the sake of his career and for the sake of just like making sure that with the risk that an offer like that might not come again, then I think we do have to take it. So yeah, it'd be a shame, right? In an ideal world, if money wasn't an issue, I would say let's loan him out, give him a year, and where like loan him out to a Premier League team, give him a year, and just really see if he can find his feet, find his best position, stay fit for a whole season. The problem is if he doesn't do that, then the fee we're going to get will be peanuts, right? So, like if I said, hey, you could loan him out, or you could take 25 million for him, what would you do?
Well, the only comparison that I have, which makes me feel like, well, maybe the loan isn't too bad an option, is what happened with Conor Gallagher, right? Because I recall Conor Gallagher, maybe he was a year younger than Smith Rowe is currently, something like that. But I remember obviously they loaned him out to Crystal Palace, and that loan went really well. Then there was all this talk about whether they were going to sell him in the summer, and he stayed and did really well. And last season he was arguably Chelsea's best player aside from Cole Palmer. And so, the stories like that make me feel that, well, maybe he just does need a season where he's just playing for a team, and then he gets that confidence, he gets his quality back up, etc., etc. But I'm very much inclined to land on what you've just said and how you concluded. Because I go back to something that you said a little while ago, right? Every now and again, you do say some like pretty interesting things and clever things. And that thing that you said a while ago, which is that, as fans, we're going to have to get used to us selling some players that we really like just for small percentage gains, because that's where we are right now. The Ramsdale Raya thing was the perfect example of that, where everyone's going, oh my God, we love this guy. We love Ramsdale. He loves us. We've gone up to second place. How the hell could you do this? And Raya doesn't seem like the most world-class keeper in the world and whatever. But at the end of the day, it was an incremental increase. And we ended up with a goalkeeper who got, the highest, won the Golden Glove and whatever, and got us that kind of extra little bit. And really, Smith Rowe, I think that we're going to have to put in this bracket where I'm not sure we can have our cake and eat it. I'm not sure we can be the sort of club that goes, oh yeah, but hey, lend and let's give him a big hug. And there was that potential there. And remember when he saved us when we were 8th and, everyone else was rubbish. And we can't do that. Like we can't have it both ways. If we think that we want to compete with clubs like Man City for the Premier League and with the likes of Real Madrid and Man City for the Champions League, if that's our target, there is no option but to be ruthless. And just kind of ending the point that Jose Mourinho said something yesterday on the Champions League punditry, which like I thought was quite insightful, in that he was talking about Real Madrid, and he was saying, look, if you look at Real Madrid fans and ask them whether they minded the fact that when Real Madrid played against Man City, they had to change their philosophy and sit back and just contain. If you ask Real Madrid fans, like, do they mind around like how they had to play at times against Bayern Munich? if you ask Bayern Munich fans, if you ask Real Madrid fans, did they mind that they were getting cut open against Dortmund in that first half? They would probably turn around and say they don't care, because all they care about is trophies and winning. And he sort of made the point. He said something like, at Real Madrid, they don't sell methodologies and philosophies; they sell trophies. And it was a classic kind of soundbite from Mourinho. But I think it is a really insightful one, where you kind of go, at some point, a club needs to just go, okay, but what do we need to do to win trophies? And I think Arsenal are in this tremendous position right now, right, where we have got this like visionary coach, great cohesive structure behind the scenes, a philosophy, a culture, all that rest of it. And now we're basically in that kind of increments mode, aren't we? We're in that kind of like, well, how do we score that extra one goal that's going to get us from the quarterfinals to the semi-final of the Champions League? How are we going to get that extra one win a season that's going to win us the Premier League title? One win would have won us the title, right? It's that's it.
And
so
you know
I'm
what? It is.
with
It's
you.
like, we will have to sell some players, and guess what? Some of those players will go and do good things because they're good players.
That
They
too.
go, look
Yeah,
at,
yeah.
you said Cole Palmer, right? Look,
Yeah.
Man City sold him. Like, and there's an argument to say, if Man City, he wouldn't have done what he'd done at Chelsea at City. I don't think he would have gotten the squad. He might have played some games, and it might have taken 3, 4, 5 years, right? Man City still went and won the league, right? And without going into accounting and stuff like that, like selling Cole Palmer probably allowed them to just keep things going financially. And I know Man City's finances are never straightforward, but it potentially allowed them to go and do something. It meant that they could go, and they didn't have to worry about, okay, we need to give Cole Palmer minutes and find him a place. There's another team there. We can't give this player minutes this season. We're going to let him go. We're going to take what we can get for him, and we're going to see how it goes. And they took a risk. And look, hindsight's a wonderful thing. And if they'd said, look, would you now take him back? Probably would, right? But guess what? There are going to be some players who go on and do good things at a decent level. Now, Smith Rowe is one of those players where I think he could potentially go to Villa, and you can just see him staying fit for the whole season, coming to the Emirates, having the game of his life, scoring 2 goals and making us look silly, right? And we're obviously terrified of that. But that's going to happen with some players, right? I remember when Joe Willock was obviously banging in those goals for Newcastle. That was when he was on loan. And then we were like, oh, what do we do? Do we keep him? Do we sell him? But we got a decent amount of money for him. He's gone on to be a decent player for Newcastle. But no one sat there thinking, we should have kept him, right?
Yeah.
Even Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, who I think even today is probably still our highest.
He is, yeah,
most
35
expensive
million.
sold
Yeah.
player. And that was like, what, 10 years ago now, probably? Like, when he left, we were like, oh, why did we sell him? Why did we sell him? And look, and if Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain stayed fit, he could have gone on to be a really, really good player and potentially become a regular Liverpool first team player for a longer period than he was. But that's just the risk you've got to take with some of these players, because players peak at different times. Some players peak at 21, 22. Some players peak at 27, 28. But ultimately, we're not Man City. We can't afford to say no to 30, 40, 50 million pounds for a player that isn't starting for us.
Well, exactly.
And if we can get that, then, unless we have a clear path to saying Smith Rowe is going to be our first or second choice number 8 for the next 4, 5, 6 years, and I don't think we can 100% say that yet, I think you have to look at offers. But again, it has to be a decent amount. I wouldn't sell him for less than I think he's worth, which is probably, I wouldn't say that for some of the other players, right? I'd say with someone like Eddie Nketiah, for example, I think we should sell him, even if it's for below his worth, because I think he's potentially blocking another player from coming in and getting those minutes. And also, I'm convinced he's not going to make it. Whereas with Smith Rowe, you just wonder, right? You just wonder. Like, I think with Eddie, he's been given minutes, he's been given chances. for almost consistently now for 2 seasons. And if Smith Rowe had the minutes that Eddie has had, we'd obviously be a lot clearer on where he is in that squad.
Yeah, and also versatility also buys you something as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because like with Smith, exactly. Because again, part of our issue is that we don't know what his position is, but then that could also be a saving grace if push comes to shove. And I think that maybe to just end on the Smith Rowe point, a lot of our fans have been saying, well, we need someone to play alongside Declan Rice. Surely Declan Rice can play the 6, and Smith Rowe is our answer to the left 8 position. And I do get it. I get why some people sort of logically come to that conclusion. But there's so many ifs in that, right? Like we don't know that he can play at that elite level in that position. You'd have thought if Arteta believed that he could, he would have already done it. And again, we go back to the thing of what are we trying to do? Who are we trying to compete with? And if you've got a Declan Rice level player, which is the right level of player that we need to compete with those teams that we want to compete with, like you need a hell of a player to play next to him, not some kind of maybe he could do this because he's quite good at dribbling and he's quite stocky in that. Like we need a different level, I think, if we're going to be sensible. But let's go on to Eddie, because there was some rumors with Eddie early doors, but that hasn't sort of resurfaced. I sort of read that Ipswich were looking at him as if they were to come up, he'd be the guy that they would target to perhaps get them the goals that they would need to stay in the division. I think you've sort of touched on it anyway. It's a definite sell from your perspective, and I think it sounds like you would say sell it all costs in inverted commas, like
Pretty
but
much. And I think
yeah,
he's on a chunky wage. I'm pretty sure when he signed that contract, people were saying 100k a week
yeah,
because
100k.
he kind of signed it at that time where everyone was getting uplifts, and he kind of got one as well. Again, I think we're obviously financially much better off than we were like 2 years ago. So in terms of that, 100k probably isn't as big a deal as it was 2 years ago. But I just think what frustrates me is more like the minutes he gets. And I just really think that he just hasn't taken his chances. He's been given chances, he's been given minutes, and like, he's had some moments, and I think he's a decent player. But at this level, I just don't think he's going to make it for us. He can still go on to have a very, very good career. He can go to another team, potentially like Ipswich, and potentially get 15, 16, 17 goals a season for the next 5 years. But
Absolutely, you could see him doing like a Solanke, couldn't you? Just
yeah,
going to a club of that sort of Bournemouth level and being the main man, and doing a good job.
and that doesn't mean let's just say hypothetically he gets, let's be optimistic. Let's say he gets 20 goals a season for an Ipswich or Bournemouth or whatever for the next 4 seasons. It still doesn't mean we were wrong to let him go.
Yeah, I agree.
It potentially might mean if we'd sold him for 2 million, we probably should have done a bit better. But I hope we do get a decent fee for him. Again, he's a young English player. At his peak, he was flirting with the national team, right? He got in the squad at one point. I don't think he got any. He might have made his debut. I can't remember if he did or not. But there's someone on a good day who could be an England international striker. So we shouldn't let him go for cheap. And again, I can see if we play out, this is where like the club really have to earn their money, which is you've got a potential young English striker who could do a job at a number of lower half Premier League teams. There's probably quite a few that could do with a striker. Edu and Richard Garlick and all those players, people should be like working their backsides off to make sure we have a market for him, and not be someone who we just end up letting go on the cheap because we have to sell, because we want to free up that space in the squad, and we let him go for like 3 or 4 million.
Yeah, agreed. Well, again, not to labour the point, but he could do a job for many teams. I think West Ham. I think he could do a job for West Ham. Probably do a job for Man United. It's that sort of level that you think that is probably right for him. But anything above it's maybe out of his zone. And the longer that he puts off a move, to be honest, the worse I think it will be for his kind of prospects of kind of getting back to being a proper goal scorer. Russ made the good point here about being perfect with Leeds if they'd been promoted. Yeah, obviously he's got that history with Leeds, doesn't he? It was kind of funny because I remember when he was out at Leeds, he was kind of constantly coming off the bench and scoring, but not quite getting a place there. But I'm sure he has fond memories of it. Let's move on to left backs stroke defenders, because two of them have been linked recently with moves. Zinchenko has had some links with Bayern Munich, and Kivior's had some links with AC Milan. Now, both, well, okay. Zinchenko's link to Bayern Munich could very, very simply be lazy journalism going that Vincent Kompany is now manager of Bayern Munich and he wants to get some of his old boys with him. I suppose it's also linked to the fact that Zinchenko sort of like fell out of favour this season for Arsenal because it was always a sense where he was not playing some games because of the tactics that we want to deploy on that day. He's obviously more of an attacking fullback playing in that inverted fullback role. And whenever we needed to kind of play against a really, really tough winger, then, you know, we went for a different option. But then actually over time, it seemed like more and more we were playing games where actually you would expect us to be playing someone based on their attacking abilities and a bit more. And Zinchenko wasn't playing, and it wasn't just because of fitness. So there is that point around him falling out of favor. What do you think, mate? I mean, he kind of joined Arsenal and very quickly became this fan favorite. I think that there is still a strong argument to suggest that he is one of the best inverted fullbacks around with regards to what he does on the ball. But what do you think now? It's 2 years on, the prospect of us losing him in the summer.
So my gut tells me that the defensive level of this team has massively increased this season, and he hasn't been able to match it. Now, does that mean we should sell him? I'm not sure. I still really do like what he gives us on the ball, and I do worry that we would then I like that having him as an option in terms of what he can do. And I think the downside is that, again, when you do have him as an option, even that option, it's a high risk, high reward type of mentality that he brings, where some of his passing, some of his balls over the top, some of his diagonals, the way he can play and bring others in around him is really good, right? But he takes some huge risks on the pitch, and both like in terms of like some of his passes where he will give it away, and then his defensive positioning because of his game, what he does, and then both when he's on the ball, but then definitely off the ball. Again, when you have to make him defend, he sometimes struggles, right? And he just certainly isn't at the defensive level of the other three players in that back line. And I know, I think a huge part of this question is like, what is Jurriën Timber going to be like when he comes back?
Yeah.
If he can do what Zinchenko can do, and maybe not even as good, but if he can do a lot of it, but at the same time defend to a higher level, I think Arteta will say that I would rather have a left back who can defend first and attack reasonably well than a left back who can attack really well but just costs you too much defensively. Because the bedrock of this team has been built, this season has been built on you don't score against us. We are the best defense in the league. And I think you bring him back, it kind of compromises that a bit. And I'm not sure Arteta wants that. Again, I think if money was no object, we could keep him and we don't have to worry about kind of raising funds. And yeah, keep him as a player. He can be a good option when we're chasing a game and we don't have to worry about it when we're at home to a lower league team and they're going to sit back and have a low block and kind of we can afford to a bit more like defensive like weakness and we can tolerate that, then yeah, we probably keep him, right? But again, if a good offer comes in, I can see us selling him.
Yeah. And
Do you
I
think?
think that
What do you think? I guess my question is: do you think we should actively sell him this summer? Like we should be, whatever happens with Bayern, if that is true or not, should we be actively contacting agents, contacting clubs, and saying he is for sale?
I think the only reason why the only event that I would do that is a bit of the unknown, which is around your Timber point, because Timber, when he joined us, he was someone who had played predominantly at right back and centre back. But when in the brief kind of times we saw him last season in the Community Shield, and then in the first game of the season against Forest, I think it was Forest, right? He played left back, and so the slight question there is: was it Arteta's plan? Was Arteta's plan to have Durham Timber play left back, or actually was that just because at that time I don't know Zinchenko might not have been fit, etc. And actually he saw that Timber as more of a right back, and who knows what that would have been for Ben White. But I digress. If it is a case where Arteta signed him going, look, I think that this is the guy I want at left back, then we've got Tomiyasu, who is that more defensively minded fullback and pretty reliable from a defensive sense. So I would struggle to see the scenario in which you can kind of have the luxury of having an inverted fullback as your kind of your third choice at that point, right? You're just basically like, oh, if there is a specific tactical scenario where we really really need the inverted fullback on the pitch, then we'd put him on. I think that is a bit indulgent. It's also like I think just interesting because maybe it's just the death of that role in the way that it was being played by him, because we saw Pep do it, right? Pep upgraded on him and got Cancelo. And then Cancelo was effectively their X factor. He was just outrageously good that period of time that he was at City. And then I know there was rumors of a falling out, but essentially, Pep just got rid of him, and he didn't just get rid of him. He basically got rid of the role because he kind of started doing a little bit with Rico Lewis, but then basically just got rid of the role entirely and didn't play with this kind of inverted fullback. So I don't know whether in a way Pep being sort of maybe one step ahead of Arteta tactically in some ways, whether Pep looked at it and goes, do you know what, I'm not able to get the defensive stability I need with the inverted fullback in the way that everyone else has evolved. Maybe Arteta has looked at it the same way and just thinks that we've evolved past that. And like you said, we can't have some traditional inverted fullback in the way that Zinchenko plays it and keep that defensive stability. So look, it's a very long way of saying that if he has faith in Timber playing that left back role, if he thinks that Timber is going to be like our main left back from a kind of general sense, and Tomiyasu is your alternative, then yeah, look, I think we should be considering offers, because who knows, we might be able to get a decent amount for him. He's a good age,
Yeah,
extremely experienced
he's a
player.
good player, and I think there's always been that conversation: could he actually do a job as an attacking eight, a left-sided eight, because that's what he
Mm,
does for Ukraine. Um, and he could he could do well there. I think probably wouldn't be able to do it for us because I think we probably need a bit more control from our left-sided eight than he would offer us. But again, he could do a really good job. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier, Wes. We're going to sell some really good players potentially this summer who could do really good job who could do a really good job at another club. Hopefully, the fact that we're doing that will mean that we get good money for these players, and we're not just selling players like Rob Holding who are not good players. So
mhm.
let's see. Yeah, again, I think with Zinchenko, it's more that he was fit for the last 8-9 games of the season, and he didn't get picked. We tried that Kibior thing when he disappeared, and that sort of worked for a bit, but then Arteta sort of moved away from that. And as soon as Tomiyasu was back, he was just like, I just want a guy who could defend.
Mm,
And I remember there was that game, I think it might have even been Fulham, where he tried to make Kibior do the inverted thing, and it was an absolute disaster. Um, and then he was just like, I'm just going to adapt this system where I'm not going to have that left back invert, and I'm going to have someone who will just stay, potentially go up and down the touchline if needed, but someone who first and foremost can defend if needed. And
mhm.
I think that's why I don't think there's any question marks about Tomiyasu. And I think did he get a new Did he sign his new contract, Tomiyasu, in the end, or
Yeah, he did. He
he
did.
did,
There was that
right? And
nice
that's
little
why,
video. Yeah, yeah.
that's why he's been given that new contract. So he's not going anywhere, and I think again, but you still think if Tomiyasu is your left back, but like every game next season, you probably look at that and say, "Oh, that's a position I can potentially upgrade on."
Yeah.
So
Unless it's Timber, right?
unless it's Timber, but then yeah. So which is why I kind of think, I think we had this debate in the pub right before before the final game, where I think if there's one position where we could spend a bit of money on, I think it might be left back, because I think it's, if we have the opportunity to just end the debate about who's going to play there in our first 11, and that player becomes available, I think Arteta will take it.
And it's interesting though, isn't it? Because who would that? Because you're right, but I find it really interesting because if we went out in the market and got a left back, regardless of how much we spent, I'm not sure which left back there is in the world that I'd be like, oh, he's obviously coming in as our out and out
Yeah, no,
number
that's
one
true.
in the same way that Ben White
Yeah,
is.
and again, it goes back to the Timber question, right? Which is,
Yeah.
was Timber intended to be that guy, and has this plan already happened? And actually, Timber's here, and maybe the plan was to use both of them for that season, because Arteta saw it coming, but then we didn't get that dual running Timber Zinchenko season. I'm not convinced. I think Timber was brought in to be the kind of inverted Tomiyasu at both positions.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, I really hope that maybe we can cover him now. But I really don't think we'll probably see Kibio at left back again, because I don't think that experiment worked too well. He was decent. He did his best. He did a decent job in some games, but I think we could see City away, for example, where his limitations really were.
Yeah, but let us talk about him because he's the other one. He's been linked to AC Milan now. Like as you'll recall, like I tried to defend him very much on this podcast, and even when we talk in at the pub or wherever it is, because he sort of gets a lot of judgment from our fans at playing at left back when in reality he's a centre back who was being asked to play at left back because of these injuries and whatnot, and ironically has barely played a game for us at centre back because Gabriel was just so injury free. Like last season, he was just never injured. Neither was Saliba, and so Kibio is who you think on paper is our backup left-sided centre half. Never had to play at that position, so our fans have kind of placed a lot of judgment on him based on left back because we've got nothing else to base it on. But what's your view on him? Because there are these links with AC Milan, and there are fans who sort of seem to suggest that they wouldn't really mind to see him go. What's your position on it?
I think it would have to take a really good sum of money. I'm not sure how much we paid for him at the time. Don't remember it being a lot.
Let's go with like 15 to 20 million, like around that.
And I think if someone offers us more than that, then yeah, we look at it. But we haven't really seen him have a run at in his best position, which is supposed to be like the backup to Gabriel and left centre back. And we spent a year with us and learning the system, learning how to play. And I think, look, let's just say something horrible happens to Gabriel and he misses 6-7 games next season. You'd probably want someone like Kiwior to come in and say, like, this is a guy who knows the system, knows how we play. Hopefully, in his best position, can be a bit better than he was at left back. But even when he was at left back, he wasn't awful. Like, he had a couple of bad games, but he did a decent job. So on that basis, I'm kind of hoping that at left centre back, he'll be all right. And I wonder that for the price we got, can we really find a good backup left centre back who looks all right? It's really hard to like find and integrate defenders, and I just, it would have to be a really good sum of money. And I think he's a type of player that you probably want to see just get a season, get games at left centre back, so we can really evaluate what level he's at. Because I think he could potentially be quite good. I don't think he's ever going to like displace Gabriel, but if Gabriel were to be out for 2 or 3 games and we had to play Kivior, famous last words, but I don't think I'd be too upset by that.
Yeah, it's fair. And I think Arteta does, we praise him so much because he deserves so much praise. But one of the things that Arteta, I think, has to get better at is rotating, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to rotate in the Premier League all the time. We've got cup competitions to do it in, at least at the start, anyway. And last season, I don't recall us doing much, even in those cup games, by way of giving Kivior minutes as centre back, and I think we can do that as well as kind of give some other players some minutes, and he needs to do it whilst basically still winning. Like, I know that sounds like it's contradictory, and maybe that's asking too much, but that's the reality of being kind of at a big club, and we are, I think, at that level where everyone understands the brief, etc. And Russ made his points on Kivior here. He's saying, with regards to Kivior, I'm sure he has his own ambitions, whether that be benching Russell starting for Milan, but doesn't think we'll get more than what we paid, and we don't have sell. I think Russ is completely spot on. My view on this is that we probably have been lulled into a false sense of security by the fact that our two main centre backs just were injury free last season. We need backup centre backs. We need players who are going to be able to sort of step in. And so if you sell Kivior, you need to go sign another left-sided centre half. And there's already an argument to suggest that we need another centre half anyway. Because at the moment our backup right-sided centre half is Ben White, and Ben White has been our starting right back. So whatever way you look at it, like, selling Kivior would represent a at the very least a gap which you'd have to fill directly. If not, we'd have to sign another player anyway. And so we're just going to have to spend more money. So my instinct is no way. I really don't think we should sell him. Well, now look, whether he ends up being good enough to play at centre back for Arsenal, time will sort of tell. But we've got someone who at least knows the club, knows the system, knows some of the combinations. So no, like I think it's an absolute no from me.
I think the only way I can see it happening is if, look, Milan are going to offer us silly money because Italian clubs don't have silly money. But if, for example, a Crystal Palace or an Aston Villa says we'll give you 35 million for him, then I say fine. Like, at that price, we could go, like, I think you're spot on, Raj. The minute we sell him, we have to go and find another Kivior type player somewhere in Europe to come in and do the job that he was doing. But I think you probably could do that if someone has given you a silly amount of money, more than what I think he's worth, to go and do that. But
is it worth it, Aaron? Is it worth it to go do that and then accept that you then also have to let that player integrate, etc., like, and there's a question mark over it?
I think if the money is right, I think if you're shocked, like, I think there are probably a few decent Jakub Kivior type players knocking about in Europe where you could do it, get him for 20, 25 million. And if someone gives us 30 million, then there is a chance we find someone better than Kivior, someone who maybe even in a year or two could even challenge Gabriel if they're that good. Like, well, like, what if we found the next Gabriel? Knocking about somewhere in Brazil, and we got him in to be Gabriel's backup. Then I can see it working out, right? But you're right. I can say that now because I do have faith in our scouting, our recruitment, the types of players that we get in. So whereas, let's put it this way, I think everyone has a price. And he's not the type of player where you say there is under zero circumstances where we sell him. And I think someone like Kivior, if for whatever crazy reason someone wants to offer us a lot of money for him, then we should entertain it. I think we're unfortunately not a state-backed club where we can afford to turn things down money like that.
This is fair. And a lot of this comes back, like a concluding point of everything that we've discussed today. It does also depend on what Arteta's plan is for the squad, what Arteta and Eddie's plan is for the squad. Last season just taught me that there is no point trying to sit there and think about, this would be a great window if we signed these 4 players, because I've got no idea what they actually think. I saw that just before we did this podcast. I saw a couple of kind of, bigger Arsenal accounts tweet, they kind of gave 4 or 5 names and they go, rate that window out of 10, kind of thing. And like, what is the point? Because we are, it is not like, it felt like in the old days, you could kind of finish the season and go, we need a centre back and we need a central midfielder and we need a right winger. And you would almost certainly see your club go into the market and do those things. Now, you've got no idea about, what kind of system we might tweak into, what kind of player who currently plays in right wing are we going to repurpose at centre half? Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't know that these things happen now. Kus or Kai Havertz coming and and all that kind of stuff. Timber signed this right back, centre back, and suddenly playing a left back. We don't know. We just don't know. So, a lot of this is just going to depend on what their vision is. So, we are just at the hour mark. The only other player I wanted to touch on was Aaron Ramsdale, because he is, I think, again, the one that everyone talks about as an obvious departure. And let's just quickly touch on it, right? Because the link has been with Newcastle mainly. People are saying that Newcastle want him, and he's up for going. And then there was a funny, I think, thing that he did on Instagram where I think he replied to one of those rumors and was just like, "Yeah, news to me" type thing. So, by that we take it to mean that he says that rumor was nonsense. I actually saw another rumor linking him as well, just like with Kivior, with AC Milan. There was a rumor, I think, going around today. But whatever the case, you've got a guy who everyone keeps everyone's prefacing this whole situation with Ramsdale is going to want to leave and be number one somewhere. Let me ask you the question, right? What if Aaron Ramsdale turns around and goes, do you know what? Maybe I'm okay being number two at a club that's challenging for all 4 trophies. Maybe I'm okay being an Ortega or a Kelleher type. Maybe I'm okay with that because I may well get my day. My keeper might get injured. I might get cup runs. I might, lots of stuff, lots of reasons. Maybe I want to do that instead of going and being number one at a kind of mid-table club. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can actually see it. I think I'm in 2 minds about Ramsdale, where I was always the view, and I think I told you guys in the pub, that I actually don't think we'll sell him. I think he will still be here at the end of the summer, and I can still see that personally potentially being the most likely option, because I think there are very few clubs who will probably pay what I think he's worth. And in Ramsdale, and I'll caveat this in a second, but I think we do have one of the best number 2s in the league. And the money we should be demanding for him, I was just checking, I think Transfermarkt, and they put him down as worth 25 million. And we should be getting, for a future, I think, England number 1 goalkeeper, a good fee. And I'm not sure there are many clubs who can pay that fee. Now, Newcastle are probably one of those clubs who potentially could, right? But you're right. I think there is a situation where either no club comes for him and at the value that we want, and I don't think we're going to be actively trying to ship him out because, again, we'll need to replace him. So I can see a situation where everyone's like, actually, well, he's happy to stick around. He's in a good place mentally. So why do we need to sell him? Now, the downside is, and you're right, you said that if there's an injury, what happens? And then I go back to remembering like what he was like when he did have those games, where I can't remember what game it was. Was it must have been the Brentford game? Yeah,
home and away.
Where this amount of focus and pressure on Ramsdale, like every game, like every minute, we were just analyzing every pass he did, everything he did, and it was just like, oh man, why? Like, we don't get this with Raya. We don't get this drama, this stress. He obviously gave that goal away to, I think it was Wissa, who might have scored, and we're just like, oh my god, this is stressful. Like, this guy clearly isn't good enough for what we want to do. So I do think he might still be here come summer. I do think he is one of the better number 2s in the league. But is that naturally a good thing for Arsenal? I'm not so sure.
Oh, it's just, I'm cracking up probably at something that you've seen as well. This is probably going to be my favorite comment we've ever got on this show ever. So I'm pulling this up. So this is Eddie Video Star. We've never had the pleasure of having a comment from Eddie Video Star before. Eddie Video Star says, "Dear the Arseholics podcast, what is with the name? Why? This is why no one is watching." Wow, Eddie. Eddie doesn't mess about. He started off with dear, so it's very like pleasant, and then he hits this crushing blow. Um, Eddie, do you have a problem with arse, Eddie? That's what I'd want to say. Are you in the closet?
I
Is
think
that
it's
what it
like
is? And you're struggling to come
I
out,
think
and this
I
is
think
really
he's
hitting
a
you?
fan. I think he's a fan, but throughout that comment, he just gets more and more disappointed with us. It's like, dear the Arseholics podcast, what is with the name? Why? This is why no one is watching. And I think if we let him carry on, he'll be even more angry.
I think so.
And he's probably like now smashing his TV at our viewing figures, because he's just so upset with us. So we're really sorry, Eddie. But thank you for joining us.
Agree, Eddie. I do just actually it's quite funny because when we went on the breakdown so Arsenal have got their breakdown show, their official show, and when we got invited on, it was funny because they initially had reservations of saying our podcast name live. They wanted to just refer to us as podcasters, and like they didn't want to say the Arseholics. And they actually did in the end. So fair play. Like really appreciate them for doing it. And when we came up with the name initially, it was definitely something we thought about. But then we were like, you know what? At least it'll be a memorable name if nothing else. So Eddie, I don't think it's because of the name that no one's really watching us. I think it's probably just because we just don't have very interesting views.
Yeah,
Perhaps that's really what it
our
is.
opinions are terrible. Come on, let's be honest. The name is
But I
just
think
an excuse.
Yeah, exactly. But so, okay, appreciate the feedback, Eddie, Video Star, and maybe that's a really good a point to end the podcast. So forever. But mainly just for tonight. So look, Aaron, and like really enjoyed chatting. We thought we were gonna also perhaps try and sneak in some talk about the managerial merry-go-round, and we could probably do that another day because who knows, in another week, all kinds of more shenanigans might happen. But it is very interesting to see clubs, at least on the face of it, kind of search for this model that's similar to what's been quite successful at Arsenal so far. I say quite successful, we've not had the trophies flooding in, but I think it's kind of impossible to argue that Arsenal are back competing with the elite clubs in the top competitions and competing for the Premier League title and up there with the sort of favourites for the Champions League. So all these clubs sort of scrapping away to sign these kind of like talented young coaches. Go on, Aaron, and what are you about to
No, I was
say?
going to say, so I know we don't want to cover it because we're out of time, but is there one thing in this whole manager saga that you think is either like, what the hell, or you just found really, really funny?
Probably the Vincent Company thing overall, right? Because let's be honest, right? Like you could just I mean, I can't even recall the order of events. They knew Tuchel was going. They initially went for Alonso, then that didn't really kind of he turned them down. They kind of thought about Nagelsmann again, then he kind of signed an extension with Germany. Then there was Emery that they sort of apparently entertained for a while. Then Ragnick was about to sign a contract, turned them down right at the end. And then there was considerations for De Zerbi, considerations for Flick. And then they went to Tuchel back again, and Tuchel sort of turned them down again. Do you know what I mean? And then like in the end, they're like Vincent Company, who had just got relegated from Burnley. In what planet? In what planet? I know everyone keeps saying about how like it's like, oh, okay, like Pep disciple, and actually Pep gave him a glowing reference, and actually it doesn't seem that out there because he may be a talented coach. But come on, guys, like, what planet is it that a young coach that got relegated with Burnley has just walked into the Bayern Munich job? It's that just
3-year
makes
contract as well.
no
3-year
sense.
contract.
Yeah, I mean, that makes no sense at all. Spare a thought for Harry Kane, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I am not. It is, put it this way, it is one hell of a gamble. And you know what, right? You go on about this, right? This Arteta thing. I think everyone is trying it now. Everyone's like, well, Arsenal like just gambled on an unproven manager, and now look where they are. Everyone's trying it now. And I think Vincent Company owes Arteta a beer. I think
Yeah, he does.
probably
He
helped
really
him
does.
get him a job. But
But at the same time, mate, like at the same time, as I said, like he was Bayern's like 10th choice. So is this really them going for
yeah,
that model, or is this them just kind of going, oh, there is no one else, and Pep gave us a reference. But I think you are right as a general point. But it was quite interesting. My mate Dave, who's a Bristol City fan, he pointed this thing out to me last season, where he was basically saying about how obviously Kieran McKenna was doing so well at Ipswich, and obviously still did incredibly well in the end, and whatever. But he was saying because of the success that Kieran McKenna was having, all of these championship clubs were trying to do the same thing and started looking to hire these like young, unproven coaches. And it happened at Bristol City, where they basically sacked a manager who the fans all really liked and was quite an experienced manager, and they hired this younger dude who was basically quite clearly this attempt at replicating what Kieran McKenna was doing. And the fans hated it, and it was just winding them up, saying all these kind of things that made him sound really pretentious and really kind of like he was trying to teach them football from scratch. And they found it nonsense, and it's not really quite worked out. And he was basically saying that all the chairmen are effectively trying to scrap around doing the same thing. So that's clearly like that sort of, we're seeing that in the Premier League now. And Russ is just talking about Maresca, and I know we've now suddenly got onto the topic, and let's maybe draw the line there, but. Yeah, I mean, it is mad to think that Chelsea have got themselves in a situation where they've kind of got rid of Pochettino, which although they didn't seem mad at certain parts of last season, to think that he's left and now they've replaced him with a coach that's just kind of his biggest job was getting promoted with Leicester in the Championship. It is a bit weird. But hey, look, let's more on that if that actually does. I'm sure that is going to get confirmed, and I'm sure we can talk about it in greater detail. And I think you're right. Like, probably not all these attempts are going to work out. So anyway, Aaron, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for joining me. And everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for all those that joined us live. Eddie, there are actually a few people who are watching us live. I can see in the corner that there are actually people watching
and
us.
Eddie, if you don't like and subscribe, honestly,
yeah,
come on,
Eddie,
man.
it's the least you can do is to like and subscribe after that heinous attack. And look, and everyone, thank you for all the support as always. So good night. See you all later. See you later, Aaron.
See you later, mate. Take care. Bye.